good morning, or whatever time it might be with you. Uh, Welcome back, everyone, to Hobbit Camp. This is our second week, and we are, again, over halfway done with the book. My name is Wesley Schuntz, and Sharon Hoff is here too, taking questions as you send them in. Now, I did want to recap, since we've covered a lot of ground already, some of what we've read. I think I typed, yeah, oh yeah, that's my Roman numeral 9. Okay, I got it. Yeah, chapters 1 through 9. The story so far. Gandalf and the dwarves arrive at Bilbo's house unexpectedly. They set out on their adventure, burglar from the trolls, visit Rivendell, meet the elves, read the runes. They're caught by goblins in the mountains. Bilbo plays Gollum's riddle game to escape and finds the ring. They encounter wargs, are chased up the trees, are rescued by the eagles. They get a chance to rest again in Beorn's house outside of Mirkwood, and then they go in, but they don't follow the very good advice of both the wizard and the bear man. They leave the path. They're captured by the elves after being captured by the spiders. They escape from the elves, riding in the barrels that have been packed by their burglar, Bilbo Baggins. And we've been exploring a few different themes as we've gone along here. The adventure, what that might mean, and how it relates to home. And as a way to think about that, we looked at the two different sides of Bilbo's character, the Took side and the Baggins side. We've seen how that's been developing, and we've seen too a lot of examples of Bilbo making choices which might strengthen or help develop either both of those sides of his character. And we've also seen a number of examples of really lucky breaks, or what looks like good or bad luck. And we'll see how those turn out as we go through the rest of the story. That becomes more and more insistent as we read along, the role of luck. As we get into the wild, we've talked about all of these different characters. Some of them seem magical, right? Or at least poetical. And so that's the next little topic there, poetry, all the different songs that are sung as characters are introduced, and the role of words and magic words, spells. We've talked a little bit about that. And recently we've seen Bilbo beginning to take on more of a leadership role, particularly in Gandalf's absence here. All right, so that's some of what we've talked about so far. If I left out something important, or you wanted to share something else that you were really thinking about from our first week of class, of camp, excuse me, send that in, and I'll be sure to share it. So on into week 2, chapters 10 and 11, A Warm Welcome and On the Doorstep. Today we're going to look at the idea of hope and how it relates to this new landscape that we enter, the desolation of Smaug. One question to think about is what's going on with the dwarves here? And they are rescued by Bilbo, of course, more than once now. And yet this is still their adventure, right? And so particularly Thorin in this reading takes on a little bit more of an important air about him. There's something about Thorin here that's new and quite remarkable. So think about how the people of Lake Town react to the dwarves' arrival. Also, we can continue looking at how Bilbo and his Took, his adventurous side, and his Baggins, his home and ordinary side, are connecting in this reading and as we go along. So keep an eye out for that. If you are doing your journals as a way to explore this book, think about maybe making some notes about the dwarves' arrival, about this new place, Lake Town, and about Bilbo's mood here. Those are some interesting things to look closely at, and maybe you can relate to Bilbo, poor Bilbo, being sick, being a little bit out of step with everybody else, marching to the beat of his own drum, of course. Uh, you might like to draw the new town on the lake it's built directly upon the water, which is really neat. Or you might want to draw the ruins of the old town, Dale, which is uh, discovered as we finally reach the Lonely Mountain, with the smoke and the uh, uh, fog and the mist coming out where the river leaps out of the mountainside. So that could be really cool and dramatic to draw. If you want to play some games with these, we suggest activities with the dwarves, keeping track of all 13 dwarves, which even the dwarves themselves are not always so good about, loading them into their boats, getting them to the mountain, and then helping them haul their supplies up the cliffs. Those are some fun sort of memory and information gathering sorts of games that you might like to play here. So enjoy those. Those are all in your program packets. I know a number of you have already been participating in the Harry Potter camp this morning. And for anyone who didn't know or maybe forgot, we've got more camps going on starting this week with Harry Potter, just started today. And then we've also got Wrinkle in Time and Lion the Witch in the Wardrobe camps coming up in the next few weeks. So a lot of great programming and material out there. Do check it out. Either live, you can sign up and participate, or you can watch it anytime at your leisure on YouTube. Cool. All right, getting into our first passage here. Sorry, it's kind of a long one, but I think it gives a really good kind of recap of where we are in the story here and how we've gotten here. So, as he listened to the talk of the raftmen and pieced together the scraps of information they let fall, he soon realized that he was very fortunate ever to have seen it at all, even from this distance. That's the Lonely Mountain. Dreary as had been his imprisonment and unpleasant as was his position, to say nothing of the poor dwarfs underneath him, still he had been more lucky than he had guessed. The talk was all of the trade that came and went on the waterways and the growth of the traffic on the river, as the roads out of the east towards Mirkwood vanished or fell into disuse, and of the bickerings of the lake men and the wood elves about the upkeep of the forest river and the care of the banks. Those lands had changed much since the days when the dwarves dwelt in the mountain, days which most people now remembered only as a very shadowy tradition. They had changed even in recent years, and since the last news that Gandalf had had of them, great floods and rains had swollen the waters that flowed east, and there had been an earthquake or two, which some were inclined to attribute to the dragon, alluding to him chiefly with a curse and an ominous nod in the direction of the mountain. The marshes and bogs had spread wider and wider on either side. Paths had vanished, and many a rider and wanderer too, if they had tried to find the lost ways across. The elf road through the wood, which the dwarfs had followed on the advice of Beorn, now came to a doubtful and little-used end at the eastern edge of the forest. Only the river offered any longer a safe way from the skirts of Mirkwood in the north to the mountain-shadowed plains beyond, and the river was guarded by the wood elves' king. So, a lot of emphasis here on the many possible ways to go on this adventure, all the different paths that they might have taken, and how each of those other paths turns out would not have worked, right? Things have changed in the recent years that the dwarves and even Gandalf don't seem to know much about. Just how dangerous this area has become on this side of the great forest of Mirkwood. It sounds like as uncomfortable and unexpected as their route has been, right? They took a different path once the eagles dropped them off far to the north of where they were expecting to go. That path through the woods, it sounds like, is the only one they could have possibly used. And even that path kind of runs out towards the end. So by getting captured by the elves and then riding the barrels in the river, turns out maybe that was kind of the only way that they were ever going to escape Mirkwood. And so, once again, what looked like bad luck, getting captured, getting imprisoned, having to ride this very uncomfortable barrel ride down the river, all of that turns out to be for the best. All right, we get a really interesting kind of picture of the landscape here too. So again, if you're kind of a picture, illustration sort of person, an artistic, imaginative kind of person, like Tolkien was, like our narrator, our storyteller here, um, this could be a really cool one to draw in a big kind of landscape with the forest off in the distance, the mountain, we get our first glimpse of it, and the river and all of this kind of marshy, um, pathless wilderness that they are traveling along on their raft through. Yeah, so just really, I think, a really cool image of this part of the adventure. They've made it through thanks to luck. All right. I might be looking at the wrong panel here. Sorry. I'm still learning how to use this thing. Okay. Lake Town. Yeah. Not far from the mouth of the Forest River was the strange town he had heard the elves speak of in the king's cellars. It was not built on the shore, though there were a few huts and buildings there, but right out on the surface of the lake, protected from the swirl of the entering river by a promontory of rock which formed a calm bay. A great bridge made of wood ran out to where, on huge piles made of forest trees, was built a busy wooden town, not a town of elves, but of men, who still dared to dwell here under the shadow of the distant Dragon Mountain. They still throve on the trade that came up the great river from the south and was carted past the falls to their town. But in the great days of old, when Dale in the north was rich and prosperous, they had been wealthy and powerful. There had been fleets of boats on the waters, and some were filled with gold, and some with warriors and armor. And there had been wars and deeds which were now only a legend. The rotting piles of a greater town could still be seen along the shores when the waters sank in a drought. But men remembered little of all that, though some still sang old songs of the dwarf kings and of the mountain, Thror and Thrain of the race of Durin, and of the coming of the dragon and the fall of the lords of Dale. Some sang too that Thror and Thrain would come back one day, and gold would flow in rivers through the mountain gates, and all that land would be filled with new song and new laughter. But this pleasant legend did not much affect their daily business. Yeah, good question here about this description from Katie. Does elf road mean built by elves or used by elves? I think both. It sounds like the elves are very possessive, right? Very protective of their territory here. Um, that's one of their accusations against the dwarves. Remember, they say you're using our path, right? And not only that, but you're stirring up the spiders that we hate them. All right, so you're not even using the path very effectively, right? So yeah, it's apparently a road that is built and used by these elves. Although it does sound like they trade with the men, the human beings. That's, I think, what the capital M men mostly refers to, just human beings, men and women, people who live further east. Um, but it's the elves, remember, that are taking this raft of barrels where Bilbo hides. You know, he's invisible, and the dwarves are packed in the barrels. It's elves who carry that along, are guiding that along the river as well. Yeah, so a lot of involvement by the elves here. Now, in this description of Lake Town, what I kind of picture is a cross between a medieval town. You know, it's sort of cobbled together, made of wood, kind of rough, and but on the other hand, I think also because of the way it's described on the water, I think of the city of Venice, this city which is built with, instead of roads leading between the different parts of town, it's canals, it's rivers, and little waterways. So again, kind of a cool combination here of the man-made, right, the city, the town, which is all built of wood, and the natural, the lake. And you might ask yourself, so why would somebody go to the trouble of building their entire city out there on the middle of the lake? Well, look what happened to the old city that was on the shore, right? It was destroyed by the dragon. So it sounds like some of the survivors of that old city of Dale have moved a little further south, a little farther down the lake, but they still stay there and build their city on the lake to be protected from the dragon by the water. And they do so because it's so lucrative, right? There's so much money to be made from this trade that goes up and down all the rivers and up and down the lake, right? So it sounds like they're in a very important kind of meeting place here. You have the forest on one side, you have further settlements, it sounds like, and people living farther east. We hear a little later that there's still dwarves living further north in the mountains, right? And then, of course, down to the south, the people that they trade with up and down this river, right? But these people, although they've made a new city here, they still sing these songs about how the dwarves one day might return, that they will fill this land again with even greater wealth, gold, and more importantly, maybe with new life, right? New songs, new laughter. Okay, so here's our people of Lake Town and the arrival of the dwarves. So a little bit unexpectedly, right? This is while the elves are still there, so this is a little awkward. Bilbo releases Thorin first and gets him back on his feet, kind of gives him a little pep talk, a little bit of tough love for Thorin here, saying, you know, so this is your adventure, right? After all, you'd better get your people together here and get on your way, right? So they release all the dwarves. Many of them are kind of out of commission right now, but a few, Thorin, Fili, and Kili, accompany Bilbo up onto this bridge out to the main part of town, and they meet the guards there. "Who are you and what do you want?" they shouted, leaping to their feet and groping for weapons. These guards are even more unprepared than the elven guards back in the palace. "Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror, king under the mountain," said the dwarf in a loud voice, and he looked it, in spite of his torn clothes and draggled hood. The gold gleamed on his neck and waist. His eyes were dark and deep. "I have come back. I wish to see the master of your town." Then there was a tremendous excitement. Some of the more foolish ran out of the hut as if they expected the mountain to go golden in the night and all the waters of the lake to turn yellow right away. The captain of the guard came forward. All right, so then there's some back and forth. What is all this about? And finally, I think it's Fili who speaks up and says, "Let's get on to the feast already. We're starving." And so they go, and we get again this repetition as Thorin enters the hall where the master and most of the people are feasting. "I am Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror, king under the mountain. I return," cried Thorin in a loud voice from the door, before the captain could say anything. So again, Thorin taking charge here with a little bit of help from Bilbo, of course, pushing him, um, not allowing the guards to have their way here. Certainly, again, these guards are not as skillful at their job as the elf guards were, right? They become sort of just an escort, bringing Thorin and Bilbo and Fili and Kili to meet the master, where Thorin makes it pretty clear how he thinks this is going to go, right? He is the king under the mountain. He is back, and he's claiming this, right? Whatever proof he might show later, right now, the main proof is himself, right? The way that he carries himself, the way that he speaks, right? With authority, with power, and he again emphasizes his ancestors, right? Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror. So going back a few generations. Why does the mountain belong to him? Because his father and his father's father were the king of that place, right? It's his inheritance, and he's back to claim it. So how do the people respond here? We've seen how the dwarves kind of bouncing back from a tough stretch of their adventure here. How do the people of Lake Town react to all this excitement? What do you guys think about this meeting at long last between the dwarves and the people? Send in your thoughts, send in things that you noticed about this interaction here. In the meantime here, of course, have to read out the poem. So here's an example of the songs that they would sing. The king beneath the mountains, the king of carven stone, the lord of silver fountains shall come into his own. His crown shall be upholden, his harp shall be restrung, his halls shall echo golden to songs of yore resung. The woods shall wave on mountains and grass beneath the sun. His wealth shall flow in fountains and the rivers golden run. The streams shall run in gladness, the lakes shall shine and burn, all sorrow fail and sadness at the mountain king's return. So they sang, or very like that, only there was a great deal more of it, and there was much shouting, as well as the music of harps and of fiddles mixed up with it. Indeed, such excitement had not been known in the town in the memory of the oldest grandfather. So a few differences here between the dwarves and the people, and a few similarities too. So one comment coming in, the master doubted there might ever have been a king under the mountain. How could he and other people of Lake Town have forgotten about the dwarves or the dragon? Yeah, it's a really good question to notice here. Um, how is everyone forgetting about the dragon, right? First of all, we've seen this already with the dwarves. They don't seem to have a plan for how they're going to deal with the dragon. And we see it here with the people too, in Lake Town. Their songs here are all about the good things that are going to happen when the dwarves return. The king is back. There's going to be wealth. There's going to be music, right? Old songs will be resung. The idea here of the streams and the lakes full of joy. The image there is that they'll shine with gold and burn. Okay, so that's a little bit interesting that they say that the lake shall burn, but I think that the image they're going for at least is that there's so much gold and wealth on all the ships in the water and the sun shining on it that it's like it's burning, maybe. Okay, but you might also hear that word burn and remember, oh yeah, the dragon, right. So one issue here seems to be that dwarves live a lot longer than mortal men. It's told here that nothing like this has happened in the memory of even the oldest grandfather, right? So there's been many generations of people since the arrival of the dragon and all the destruction there. It's been a while. Nobody living now actually remembers. So all they have to go on are these songs and these stories. And it seems like the songs that most people care about, again, are the happy songs, the good songs, all the good things that'll happen when the dwarves and the king returns. Um, the image here of the repetition here of the king, right? The king, the Lord, his crown, his harp, his halls, right? And of course, not least, his wealth. All of this, again, helps to emphasize how important Thorin is in this moment, right? These are songs that are all about him in a way. They don't name him specifically, but he is claiming that he is that king that they're singing about. Great. A couple good comments here from Lucy. She says, it sounds like the lakemen think all their troubles are over, and the lakemen need to see the dragon to believe he's there. Yeah, there's a big difference between hearing old stories about what happened, like history, right? And then seeing it for yourself, right? And Yeah, none of them have actually dealt with a dragon. Um, the amazing thing to me, though, is that even Thorin and Balin, some of these characters who were there, seem to have kind of are trying to ignore the fact that they're going to have to deal with the dragon, if not actually forgotten it. Yeah. So even those who have seen the dragon, maybe for other reasons, want to push that aside for now. Let's focus on the happy part here, right? The excitement and great confidence, right? Some of the songs were old ones, but some of them were quite new and spoke confidently of the sudden death of the dragon and of cargoes of rich presents coming down the river to Laketown. These were inspired largely by the master, and they did not particularly please the dwarfs. But in the meantime they were well contented, and they quickly grew fat and strong again. Indeed, within a week they were quite recovered, fitted out in fine cloth of their proper colors, with beards combed and trimmed, and proud steps. Thorin looked and walked as if his kingdom was already regained, and Smaug chopped up into little pieces. Then, as he had said, the dwarf's good feeling toward the little hobbit grew stronger every day. There were no more groans or grumbles. They drank his health, and they patted him on the back, and they made a great fuss of him, which was just as well, for he was not feeling particularly cheerful. He had not forgotten the look of the mountain, nor the thought of the dragon. And he had besides a shocking cold. For 3 days he sneezed and coughed, and he could not go out. And even after that, his speeches at banquets were limited to "Ague-berry budge." So that's his nose all stuffed up. Poor Bilbo, right? He was not packed in the straw in the barrels, but he was dunked and soaked and cold overnight. And so it sounds like he's caught a cold now that they've arrived in Lake Town here. So as much as the dwarves, especially Thorin, are sort of lording it over everyone, walking around very proud with their chests puffed out, um, Bilbo is remembering just how much they still have to do here. Um, so it's a little bit of a shift here. Um, Bilbo was the one who was free and had the ability to roam around the palace, and now in a much more open way, the dwarves are the ones roaming around town, listening to all these songs and adulation, admiration of them. Meanwhile, Bilbo is laying low at home, trying to recover. You know, thinking about that, it might make us remember back to Bilbo's two sides, right? So here, when Bilbo's down, he's sick, he stays home, trying to get well again, and that's in a way the Baggins side of him taking charge, right? Um, when you're sick, when you're down, when you're not in kind of a outgoing mood or whatever, that's okay, right? That is part of who he is, and that's how you get better, right? By resting. So you need that time to yourself, that time to uh, what's the word for when you get over a sickness. Anyway, there's a word for that. I can't think of it right now. Yeah, Bilbo is the only one who still has sense, says Lucy. Yeah, I think I'd agree. Yeah, there's also the elves. Don't forget them. So the elves are kind of interesting here. They notice what's going on with the dwarves. Somehow the dwarves escaped. Again, the elves are kind of putting it together pretty quickly, kind of like Gandalf did. They're like, oh, there's that Bilbo, that burglar. What's he up to? Where was he that whole time, right? Um, and so the elves too seem to have a little bit of sense here. But the dwarves are getting a bit carried away. It's Bilbo, his Baggins side, his steady common sense, right, side that is gaining strength here. Yeah. Gosh, I can't think of it. Anyway, okay, the king and the master. This is an interesting scene. This is the elves again talking. Sorry, the elven king. Very well, we'll see. No treasure will come back through Mirkwood without my having something to say in the matter. But I expect they will all come to a bad end, and serve them right. He at any rate did not believe in dwarves fighting and killing dragons like Smaug, and he strongly suspected attempted burglary or something like it, which shows he was a wise elf, and wiser than the men of the town, though not quite right, as we shall see in the end. He set out his spies about the shores of the lake and as far northwards toward the mountain as they would go, and waited. At the end of a fortnight, that's 2 weeks, I believe, Thorin began to think of departure. While the enthusiasm still lasted in the town was the time to get help. It would not do to let everything cool down with delay. So he spoke to the master and his counselors and said that soon he and his company must go on towards the mountain. Then, for the first time, the master was surprised and a little frightened. He wondered if Thorin was, after all, really a descendant of the old kings. He had never thought that the dwarves would actually dare to approach Smaug, but believed they were frauds who would sooner or later be discovered and be turned out. He was wrong. Thorin, of course, was really the grandson of the king under the mountain, and there is no knowing what a dwarf will not dare and do for revenge or the recovery of his own. So kind of an interesting contrast here between our three different king type political leaders. There was a great question the other day about is the great spider the king spider? Thinking back to all these different kings that we've seen, like the great goblin, right? He does seem to be like the king of the goblins. Well, he gets his head chopped off, so it's not so good to be the king of a horrible people, right? We saw the wolf leader, and we saw the Lord of the Eagles, right? They're sort of wild. We saw Beorn as a leader of his animals that live around him, his great strength and his wild aspect as well. Of course, we've seen the Elven King, who again is kind of possessive. He wants to get more treasure. He doesn't want to let the dwarves go, but they'd escape. And so now he sort of steps back and he's going to watch and wait and sort of let the dwarves' own greed lead to their downfall. That seems to be the way that the Elven King is looking at this. So again, he's wise, but he's not quite right, the narrator tells us. So not that wise, not as wise as Elrond. We already know that, or Gandalf for that matter. We see that Thorin here is going to hit while the iron's hot, so to speak, right? He wants to get moving after 14 nights, a fortnight. They're going to use this kind of excitement to their advantage to kind of push them along their way and get all the stuff that they need while they have the support of the town. Meanwhile, the master of Lake Town, he's a kind of a crafty guy. He's very concerned with making money any way he can, right? Controlling the trade up and down the river. And he doesn't actually think that the dwarves are going to succeed either, but he doesn't think they'll succeed not because of their own greed, but because he doesn't believe they are who they say they are, right? And so he's wrong. The narrator tells us straight out he was wrong, right? He doesn't understand who Thorin is, and he doesn't understand how badly Thorin wants this treasure and this territory, this kingdom back, right? So we get a pretty clear breakdown here of the different leaders. None of them is quite right. One of them, at least, the master, is totally wrong, right? So we are, as the readers, we're kind of left to try to piece together, okay, so what is this actually going to look like, right? And that, of course, is the same situation that Bilbo is in. He is also sort of watching, observing these different leaders and seeing how this can actually turn out and work, right? So we move along in our canoes, in our boats, up the river. So you have to paddle against the flow of the river, right? So it's a weary journey and a quiet and stealthy one. There was no laughter or song or sound of harps, and the pride and hopes which had stirred in their hearts at the singing of old songs by the lake died away to a plodding gloom. They knew that they were drawing near to the end of their journey, and that it might be a very horrible end. The land about them grew bleak and barren, though once, as Thorin told them, it had been green and fair. There was little grass, and before long there was neither bush nor tree, and only broken, blackened stumps to speak of, ones long vanished. They were come to the desolation of the dragon, and they were come at the waning of the year. There lies all that is left of Dale, said Balin. The mountain sides were green with woods, and all the sheltered valley rich and pleasant in the days when the bells rang in that town. He looked both sad and grim as he said this. He had been one of Thorin's companions on the day the dragon came. So this idea here of desolation, again, like I mentioned, this word has kind of two senses, which are related. Desolation, in this case, literally is the way that the land all around looks. It is called the desolation of the dragon. Again, just like we saw the name The Hill, where Bilbo lives, the lonely mountain, right? We take this word that's kind of a description of the place and it becomes the name of the place, capital W, wild, right? The wild, description and the name. Anyway, the desolation of the dragon, that helps explain. You can think of that the dragon is in charge of it, right? It belongs to the dragon, but also it's the desolation that's caused by the dragon. The dragon created this place. He destroyed what was there and made it broken and just a shadow, ashes of its former self. So very, very bleak, gloomy, just depressing, right? And that's sort of that effect of the place is the other meaning of the word desolation. It's the feeling that you get when you look at such a place, right? That is the feeling of depression, of being sad, of being like Balin, sad and grim, right? Grim, sort of stern, um, really down. And that's what Bilbo was like too, right? He was sick and he was kind of downcast, not in the same excited mood as the dwarves and especially the people of the town who are cheering and everything. No, desolation, right? Being depressed, being in a state where you're not sure how to go forward. There's no hope. There's no obvious way out of this situation, right? This has been going on for many generations of people. The dragon has destroyed this place and nothing is growing here. Okay, so that has to do with not only the natural environment, right? No trees, no grass, but also the town, the old city of Dale, and how beautiful that used to be. If you remember Thorin's description from the very beginning, talking about all the wonderful crafts and toys and cheerful people in town, all of that has been destroyed as well. And it has not been rebuilt. So, um, any other observations that you guys have here of this this setting of the lonely mountain, the um, the desolation of the dragon, the ruins of Dale, right? Um, you might kind of imagine, right, if you're thinking along the lines I was about the medieval Venice kind of lake town, then what Dale would be is like the old ruins of some old castle, you know, tumbled down, maybe something like ancient Roman ruins, which dot the landscape, not only in England but all around Europe, right? So that kind of sense that there used to be something great here, something wonderful, but it has collapsed, it has fallen apart, and it's not clear how to rebuild it. All right, so the desolation. All right, so all through these chapters, Bilbo has been really down in the dumps, really depressed, sick, but now, again, the tables turn again. So the dwarves are sort of losing hope here. They finally arrived at the end of their journey, and they're not sure what to do now. They're seeking the door. Now, strange to say, Mr. Baggins had more than the others, that is, of hope. He would often borrow Thorin's map and gaze at it, pondering over the runes and the message of the moon letters Elrond had read. It was he that made the dwarves begin the dangerous search on the western slopes for the secret door. They moved their camp then to a long valley, narrower than the great dale in the south where the gates of the river stood, and walled with lower spurs of the mountain. Two of these here thrust forward west from the main mass in long steep-sided ridges that fell ever downwards toward the plain. On this western side there were fewer signs of the dragon's marauding feet, and there was some grass for their ponies. From this western camp, shadowed all day by cliff and wall until the sun began to sink toward the forest, day by day they toiled in parties, searching for paths up the mountainside. If the map was true, somewhere high above the cliff at the valley's head must stand the secret door. Day by day, they came back to their camp without success. All right. Another comment here from Lucy. The dragon has a bad temper. That seems to be especially on the side of the mountain where the people were, right? The main gate where the river flowed out and the city of Dale at its bottom. That side has been totally destroyed. And they can still, again, see the smoke from the dragon and his again the evidence of his bad temper. Yeah. Now on this side, they've come all the way clear around the Lonely Mountain now to the west, and this is where they're searching for the secret door. Right. This is sort of their only hope here. They aren't going to be able to face the dragon head on, and so they have to find the door that's mentioned on the map, the one that the runes describe how to find. So in this portion of the reading, we're told that Mr. Baggins had more hope than the others. He is the one who seems to actually remember that hint about where to look for the door and how to open it. He's the one who, just like always back home, he used to like looking at maps. Now here, it's becoming real, right? This adventure, where he has to actually use his wits, make sense of this strange message on the map, and find this secret door. Somehow, the other dwarves are all sort of just going by brute force, right? Tramping all over the mountainside, trying to find the door that way. Bilbo's the one who seems to use his wits a little bit here, trying to work smarter and not harder. Now, there's also a slight shift here where the desolation is not quite as bad on this side, right? And so that sort of connects with Bilbo's mood getting a little bit better here. They have the shadows in the morning and then the light of the setting sun in the evening, because they're on the west side of the mountain, right? So as the sun sets, it lights up the side of the cliffs with its glow. But for many days here, they have no success. They are kind of stumped. But at last, unexpectedly, they found what they were seeking. Fili and Kili and the Hobbit went back one day down the valley and scrambled among the tumbled rocks at its southern corner. About midday, creeping behind a great stone that stood alone like a pillar, Bilbo came on what looked like rough steps going upwards. Following these excitedly, he and the dwarves found traces of a narrow track, often lost, often rediscovered, that wandered on to the top of the southern ridge and brought them at last to a still narrower ledge which turned north across the face of the mountain. Looking down, they saw that they were at the top of a cliff at the valley's head and were gazing down onto their own camp below. Silently clinging to the rocky wall on their right, they went in single file along the ledge till the wall opened and they turned into a little steep-walled bay, grassy-floored, still and quiet. Its entrance, which they had found, could not be seen from below because of the overhang of the cliffs, nor from further off because it was so small that it looked like a dark crack and no more. It was not a cave and was open to the sky above, but at its inner end a flat wall rose. Up in the lower part, close to the ground, was as smooth and upright as mason's work, without a joint or crevice to be seen. No sign was there of post or lintel or threshold, nor any sign of bar or bolt or keyhole, yet they did not doubt that they had found the door at last. So this is clearly the steps, right, have been made to be hidden behind this pillar. It's Bilbo who finds it. They find it by retracing their steps a little, right, someplace that was kind of right under their nose by their campsite. They go back and they find this. They head up. It's very dangerous, right? They have to go right along the side of the cliff, one at a time. It's just a narrow little track with a steep fall, And when they get across it, then there's this kind of open area that, again, has a clear evidence of somebody making this, because the wall is so smooth. But there's no obvious way in either, right? So as much as they try to feel around the stone, they can't find the edges of the door. It's completely sealed. So in a way they found it, right? They know where the door is now, but in a way they still haven't because they don't know how to open it, which is kind of important, right? It's very carefully described here that this area is open to the sky, right? And so we might want to remember the description of Durin's day, which is, I think this is the last slide for, oh, there's one more before that. Yeah, all right, so we'll come to Durin's day in a second, sorry. First, this is something that Professor Olson, the Tolkien professor, points out in his book. I think I got it here. Yeah, in this book, Exploring JRR Tolkien's The Hobbit by Corey Olson. Highly recommend it. Once you guys have read The Hobbit and want to go and explore it a little bit more deeply, like we're doing in this camp here, there's a lot of great material in that book, and that's where I'm taking a lot of these ideas. So this is one that I had never noticed, but I think is really, really neat. Mountain and hill is the idea here. Bilbo found sitting on the doorstep lonesome and wearisome. There was not a doorstep, of course, but they used to call the little grassy space between the wall and the opening the doorstep in fun, remembering Bilbo's words long ago at the unexpected party in his hobbit hole, when he said they could sit at the doorstep till they thought of something, and sit and think they did, or wandered aimlessly about, and glummer they became. Their spirits had risen a little at the discovery of the path, but now they sank into their boots, and yet they would not give it up and go away. The hobbit was no longer much brighter than the dwarfs. He would do nothing but sit with his back to the rock face and stare away west through the opening, over the cliff, over the wide lands to the black wall of Mirkwood, and to the distances beyond, in which he sometimes thought he could catch glimpses of the misty mountains, small and far. If the dwarfs asked him what he was doing, he answered, "You said sitting on the doorstep and thinking would be my job, not to mention getting inside. So I am sitting and thinking." But I am afraid he was not thinking much of the job, but of what lay beyond the blue distance, the quiet western land, and the hill and his hobbit hole under it. So what do you guys notice going on in this scene here? We have Bilbo with his back to the door, his back to the mountain, looking all the way, in his imagination at least, all the way west from towards where they have come from, right? Across the forest of Mirkwood, which he already climbed up a tree and was looking around over the top of. And that's when he saw those little butterflies, remember? So this time he's staring over that forest again from much further away, back to the Misty Mountains, which he was at the top of those too, in the eagle's eyrie, in their nest, not by choice, but so that's another place that he has been, and he can look in his imagination even beyond that, back all the way to the quiet western land and the hill with his hobbit hole. Right? So in a way, he's come his whole journey now, and all he can do is think of the place he's come from, his hole, his home under the hill. And so there's this kind of parallel, this kind of relationship that's set up here between the hill where he lived and the mountain where he is now. And in some sense, right, he's trying to find his way home. Now, the only way he can do that is by completing this adventure. Right? He's got to find his way into the mountain, just like he used to want to stay in his hole under the hill back home. So I think that's a really neat way of kind of looking at how Bilbo's two sides here are both really, really active, right? As he's sitting there, he's thinking, but not really thinking about how to get into the mountain. He's really thinking about missing his home. But it's by doing this, okay, that we come to Durin's day and the solution arrives. I didn't put all of this on the slide because it's a little too long, but I think it's all kind of interesting. So I'm going to go back and read a little bit more here. Bilbo's got this feeling that something's going to happen. All day, Bilbo sat gloomily in the grassy bay, gazing at the stone, or out west through the narrow opening. He had a queer feeling that he was waiting for something. Perhaps the wizard will suddenly come back today, he thought. If he lifted his head, he could see a glimpse of the distant forest. As the sun turned west, there was a gleam of yellow upon its far roof, as if the light caught the last pale leaves. Soon he saw the orange ball of the sun sinking towards the level of his eyes. He went to the opening, and there, pale and faint, was a thin new moon above the rim of the earth. Okay, so we've got the sun and the moon both in the sky. At that very moment, he heard a sharp crack behind him. There on the gray stone in the grass was an enormous thrush. It's a bird, nearly coal black, its pale yellow breast freckled with dark spots. Crack. It had caught a snail and was knocking it on the stone. Crack, crack. The knocking of the thrush. Remember? Suddenly Bilbo understood. Forgetting all danger, he stood on the ledge and hailed the dwarves, shouting and waving. Those that were nearest came tumbling over the rocks as fast as they could along the ledge to him, wondering what on earth was the matter. The others shouted to be hauled up the ropes. Except Bomber, of course, he was asleep. Quickly Bilbo explained. They all fell silent, the Hobbit standing by the grey stone, and the dwarves with wagging beards watching impatiently. So we get this very interesting scene now. The sun sank lower and lower, and their hopes fell. It sank into a belt of reddened cloud and disappeared. The dwarves groaned, but still Bilbo stood almost without moving. The little moon was dipping to the horizon. Evening was coming on. Then suddenly, when their hope was lowest, a red ray of the sun escaped like a finger through a rent in the cloud. A gleam of light came straight through the opening into the bay and fell on the smooth rock face. The old thrush, who had been watching from a high perch with beady eyes and head cocked on one side, gave a sudden trill. There was a loud crack. A flake of rock split from the wall and fell. A hole appeared suddenly about 3 feet from the ground. Okay, so remember, this is a door that's not only in a place, but also in a specific time, that time when the last moon of autumn and the setting sun are both in the sky, and it's the light that sort of points down from the sun like a finger that shines straight through onto the wall, right, onto the door, and finally the outline appears. The keyhole is where this crack comes, right? So before it was the thrush cracking snails, the knocking of the thrush knocks. That seems to be what triggers this moment for Bilbo, right? That he finally understands, he finally gets it and finds the door. And not a moment too soon, right? So the way that that hope and desolation play into this is kind of interesting. This is the moment when their hope is the lowest, right? They still have some hope, but it's at its lowest point here. They had gotten a little bit recovered by the excitement of knowing that the door was here somewhere, right? But now it's like, again, just like when they were in Mirkwood, and they could just sort of see the flames and the feast in the trees, but they couldn't reach it. You know, that's when they're sort of really really losing hope. It's like that here too. They're so close, but just not quite there. And that's when their hope gets to its lowest point. And that's when this great kind of aha moment comes out, right? I think that is very interesting, right? You wouldn't feel the same excitement and joy of discovery if you didn't face the real possibility of a failure, of not actually getting there, right? And so this excitement is even greater than the one that the people feel in the town when the dwarves arrive, right? That's sort of a light and happy feeling, a cheerfulness. But this is something different. This is really the realization, the coming true of this wish that the dwarves and Bilbo have had this whole long adventure. So there's a couple comments here. Great question here. Was that luck working again? The clouds could have blocked the prophecy, but the light came through at just the right moment. Yeah, even the clouds seem to be conspiring to make this really, really dramatic, right? For a moment, the sun is hidden in the clouds, and then at the last possible instant, this red ray of sun escapes, right? It escapes the clouds, just like the dwarves escaped from the spiders and the elves and the goblins, right? It's again that kind of cosmic thing going on, just like the wind is a symbolic of their journey. Now it's like the sun is getting in on the act. Yeah, another comment here. Bilbo was right. He sat on the doorstep and thought, and something came to him. Yes, that's a great way of putting it. From Lucy. Yeah, I agree. I agree. He is doing just what he said he would do. His took side and his Baggins side are at peace together and working together, and it happens in the only way possible. So back to the question, is that luck? If it's luck, it's pretty amazing, right? It's pretty remarkable. Not only did they come by the only possible path to get to this point, but they came on the only possible day that this door would have appeared, the keyhole there. Thorin happens to be close enough and happens to have the key, thanks to Gandalf, right? So there's certainly some amazing luck going on here of the timing of this and everything kind of coming together in just the right way. But again, I would point out that there is also a lot of choice. There are a lot of choices that characters are making here, like Bilbo doing his thinking and his quiet waiting sort of thing, and like Gandalf's choices to gather Bilbo onto the party to give the key back to Thorin, right? Gandalf could have held on to it, but he trusted Thorin with it and with the map, right? Gandalf went off in his other adventure, which we'll hear more about soon. But anyway, yeah, some luck is involved, but also some definite choices are involved to make this moment come to pass. So we're at the final stage of the adventure here. They've opened the door as the sun is finally setting. It opens, they push it open in the dusk, in the darkness now. And when they do, they describe it, it's like a mouth opening, leading down into the darkness. And it also seems as if darkness flowed out like a vapor. So pretty scary. You can see that we're in that part of the book now, like we've been seeing all along. There's adventurous chapters, and then there's more calm, relaxed chapters. Clearly, we're shifting into another really adventurous one here, where next time we will meet the dragon, and our burglar will prove himself. Yeah. So think about all the times so far that Bilbo has tried to prove himself or has actually accomplished some things, right? He has gained a lot and he's grown a lot on this adventure. Think about those and how they lead up to, how they kind of play into the way that Bilbo now is going to deal with Smaug. Look at what Bilbo actually does. We're told that he, of course, talks to the dragon in the right way. Right? So what is the right way to talk to a dragon? Which Bilbo seems to know. Yeah, how does Bilbo handle this this final test? Well, not totally final, as we'll see. Right? Turns out there's a little more of the adventure after this, but the dragon, of course, where the dragon is, there's also treasure. So that's again part of the reason for this whole adventure is to get this treasure back. What treasures and what valuable information does Bilbo find down there where the dragon is? Notice how the treasure, the actual physical thing, goes hand in hand with this even more maybe valuable knowledge that Bilbo brings back to the surface from underground. So some really interesting stuff here we'll talk about next time. As always, feel free to send in any thoughts and questions outside of the class at our email. And please do register and let us know that you're following along on signumuniversity.org/academy. That's where you can keep us posted on who's listening and what you think of the class. We certainly look forward to hearing from you. So happy reading chapters 12 and 13 for next time. And until then, enjoy. I will see you then.